Hey, homies, it's your boy Choppadong here. We're going to do a two tight player pool for Saturday, the early and the main slate on DraftKings and FanDuel, probably respectively. I haven't looked too much today, which is why this is a great opportunity to show you how simple and how easy this can be to build safe and effective cash game lineups that are very, very competitive, even with the Sharks, even if you don't know what you're doing. Because what we have in the industry these days, we didn't have this back in the day, but what we have in the industry these days is ownership projections. And the ownership projections take a snapshot of what everybody is projected to appear in other people's lineups, 30%, 40%, whatever. And we can use those ownership projections because if everybody sees it, it's probably right. It doesn't work out all the time in baseball, but it's probably the correct play. And by playing as many of those plays as you can, you're generally going to be right on the right track. You're going to be a little different elsewhere. If that's okay, because you're going to take a 30% guy and another 30% guy and another 30% guy, and 60% of the time somebody's going to choose somebody a little bit differently than you. But you're going to be right often enough that probably 6 or 7 of your players are going to be highly owned. 2 or 3 of them might be a little different, might be a little bit of your opinion or of a cheat sheet's opinion or something like that. And that's what's going to make the difference between cashing and not cashing and getting over that hump of all of those people using the same players. We're running about 33 and 15, 33 and 16, something like that. Now we're running at about a 67, 68% win rate with this methodology. So let's dive in, show you DraftKings, the early slate today. We don't have lineups out. As the lineups do release, obviously you will end up seeing these numbers change. So stay tuned because, again, things might change as we go through the day. We make ourselves about 5 lineups. We don't use any randomization. We don't use any ownership. We don't use any of this jazz. Just a couple of uniques, optimal mode for a cash game type of lineup. And we sort by projected ownership. We bring all of those high numbers to the top. We uncheck every player. We don't use any stacking. We don't do anything like that in a cash game. And now we go position by position. We start checking people back. It looks like Jeffrey Springs, Aaron Nola, Justin Verlander. These guys are going to get the bulk of the run when it comes to your cash game pitchers. Things start to drop off down here to the 23%. They really drop off under 15%. So if you wanted to use Alex Wood for a little bit of salary relief, you probably could. I don't know if Wood and Springs is the right combination. You probably would want to include one of these bigger names, more consistent, more established type of pitcher, but we'll let the optimizer decide for us because it will mix and match where the best value on the slate is. We're just restricting it to those players that are carrying a lot of ownership. It looks like Salvi Perez at catcher, Stephen Voigt, whatever, and JT Realmuto. Now, again, what's the difference between Eric Haas and JT Realmuto? Nothing, right? We're just cutting the line off somewhere. We're trying to stay as close to the top as we can, generally playing 2 to 3 position players. And then sometimes we'll see a big drop here between 15% and 10% or whatever. I'll include Rhys Hoskins. I'll even include Joey Votto today because Joey is a cash game type of pitcher or player most of the time, and he's he's not cheap anymore, but he was really, really cheap in the beginning of the year. But again, this is just 2 to 3 to 4 names unless we see something really, really obvious stick out, which I'm hoping we would get to see, but it does not look like we're going to. Urias and Brujan are fine. Scope is fine. Gives us a couple of choices that are going to be relatively high owned, but at 10 to 15%, they're not high owned anyway. So if you find somebody else down here a little bit lower down the list, Jonathan India, for example, leading off for Cincinnati, and his game logs look good, Jose Altuve, and he seems to be swinging the bat well lately, use those guys. Double check their game logs and take a shot on them. You're not losing anything relative to the field. Where you have to play guys is when they're 40% owned or so. That's just generally who you're going to have to stick with. So when we find those guys that really stick out, that's who we focus on. Evan Longoria, I would double check the game logs on him. Jace Peterson is a maybe. Down in the 8 hole is pretty much no bueno. But if people are taking some salary relief there, you might want to build a fairly similar lineup yourself because it's probably what the pros are doing. It's probably correct. Willie Adames said there's just not much really standing out early this morning. So there's a 30% Kyle Schwarber, 30% Bryce Harper. You're probably going to want to play those 2 guys. They're carrying enough ownership that, yes, you can cash without them. But if they have monster days, it's really, really going to benefit you to have them in your lineup. So you're probably going to want to use them. These other guys are all just kind of iffy. Maybe, maybe not. Mike Trout's always a cash game consideration type of player. We'll come down here a little bit more to Herrera. Nemo in the leadoff is usually a good cash play. So we'll stop it there. We'll run 5 lineups. I guess I need to make my little change, which is super easy to make. Just knock one little tenth or a hundredth of a point off. You don't change the projections hardly at all. And now you get your lineups in there. You got Verlander. Your pitchers look like there's Wood, so he did pop in there. But Verlander, Nola, that's interesting, going double high. There's your two of your 40% owned guys. With some Alex Wood mixed in, that's fine. Other core plays would be a Kyle Schwarber, of course. Javi Baez is interesting. Stephen Vogt is interesting. But we're going to look for no more. There's a 3x3 that's a little bit stacked up today for what? We've got a 9-game slate. That's quite a bit of games. I'd like to see it a little bit less stacked than that for cash games. I like to spread out and cover fairly quite a few offenses, fairly spread out, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. So something like this with 2 Phillies, 2 Detroit, 2 Milwaukee Brewers might be a little bit better in terms of what I would be looking for. Another lineup here that's not too bad. There's 3 Phillies again, but 3 Phillies with Harper and Schwarber in them. Having a third Philly in there somewhere is not wrong. So you're getting those decent cash game types. Any of these lineups are probably viable for cash games. Your percentage of ownership is going to be up there quite a ways. That's the idea. But you're still going to have some guys that project low enough that not everybody's going to have Jace Peterson or Urias or any of those. They carry enough ownership that you're probably using the projections correctly without doing any research on these guys. But if you wanted to do research and pivot off to some guy who's 9 or 10% owned, you're fine there too. Let's dive into FanDuel really quick. Let's run over one of those slates as well. Early only is how many games? Just 2. So we got to go to the main for FanDuel. Same thing. Setup 5 lineups. Optimal mode 2 to 3 innings. Do 3 innings here just for kicks and giggles. Nothing else. We just come down here to projected ownership. Bring all those guys to the top. Uncheck the boxes. And away we go. Again, Spriggs. See, there's not much of an ownership difference here between Springs and Nola. Maybe down to Verlander. I like Verlander most of the time, so I'm going to include him. Even if he's a little bit lower owned, I think that's actually a good thing. We don't need catcher most of the time because they carry very low ownership over on FanDuel, being that catcher and first base is combined. There's Joey Votto. Underpriced on FanDuel. It's priced up on DraftKings, but it's underpriced on FanDuel, so he kind of becomes the chalk. You could include maybe a few of these other guys if you wanted to. You certainly don't have to. You could probably just take Votto and run, Baez and run. But if you need to include some of these 15% or higher owned guys, go for it. Just to give the optimizer a little room to work. But see, when you get a big drop from 20 to 11, I'm probably just using Longoria and moving on. So I don't need Urias or Bregman or anybody like that unless somebody's running really, really hot, is in a good favorable matchup, and most of the industry is missing it, in which case you're taking a little bit of a risk going with a lower owned guy because he has to perform for you. If he doesn't perform for you, you're really behind the 8 ball in a cash game. It's great for a tournament, but you're behind the 8 ball for a cash game. 2 guys at 20% owned, drops off to 15 and 10. I don't need anybody other than Baez or Adames in shortstop position. There's big Schwarber, big Harper again, highly owned on both sides. Austin Slater jumps into the mix. Alvarez, Mike Trout. This is where the pricing gets a little bit softer on FanDuel compared to DraftKings, and it brings a few more different names. Your player pools are a little bit different, but see, this is just 20 players. Make ourselves 5 lineups. Looks like loving Verlander. Verlander in all of them, even though he's a little bit lower owned. Then Votto in every lineup, Baez in every lineup, Slater in every lineup, and then we're starting to mix and match. So 2 Reds, 2 Giants, this lineup is fine. 2 Giants, this lineup is fine. 2 Brewers. See, these lineups, it builds you just really, really good, decent, spread out, safe lineups that are using these ownership projections to tell you who to play. This is the easiest way to begin learning cash games. If you want to spice it up a little bit and you want to learn maybe when there's good chalk and bad chalk, you need to come inside dfsarmy.com, talk to the coaches. They will direct you in the proper direction to become an even better cash game player, pick up some tournament strategies and whatnot, and maybe turn $1 instead of into $2, maybe turn it into $100, maybe turn $20 into $1 million. It just depends on what you want to play, what sport you're playing, and it is all included with our VIP program, dfsarmy.com. Right now through tomorrow, you can use coupon code USOPEN for a 50% off discount your first month and 10% locked in thereafter as long as you remain a member at dfsarmy.com. We don't raise your price. That's the beauty of the system. Come in, get the coaching, get the tools, get access to people like me. Let's talk. Let's make you a better DFS player. That said, 10 minutes, that's all it took to build 2 really, really strong cash lineups on FanDuel and DraftKings today covering the main slates. We're in and out of here. We'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.